Far to the south, in tornado twister country, in Kansas and Oklahoma, tragedy struck in the dark skies in this early morning. We have some pictures here that came over the AP wire, and it looks just as though they were pictures taken in World War II in some of the utterly flattened cities of Europe or in the Orient. Army trucks are on the scene, soldiers and civil defense workers and Red Cross people digging through the absolutely flattened homes. There's an air photo of Udall, Kansas, where at least a big blade just swept across the land, killing everything in its path. There's one picture here somewhere where it's the carcass of a truck that, here it is, a tree that was blasted by the winds, and the winds picked up a truck and stripped the body off of it and took this heavy steel chassis, the frame, and just twisted that and then hung it from the limb of a tree. Well, Bob, you're here to talk mainly about weather, but there's such a parallel here that in the scenes of devastation that we see before us. It's much like the A-bomb devastation, isn't it?
It certainly is, Bill. I was amazed in looking at some of these pictures you had to note the pattern of similarity between the devastation wrought here and that in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the cities that have undergone an atomic bomb explosion. They look almost identical, and in fact, I can tell you that the effect of the blast of a tornado and the effect of the blast of air from an atomic bomb have almost identical results in the destruction of a house.
Well, since they do have almost identical results, could the same safety measures, precautionary measures that you'd take against an A-bomb blast be utilized for such wind devastation as this?
Very definitely. The pattern is very similar, and that's one of the reasons that we feel that in urging people to prepare themselves for an A-bomb blast, we're not talking about something that's purely hypothetical. We're talking about something that certainly could happen. And for the people in Minnesota, where we are not subject as often to tornadoes as people in other parts of the country, we still have to remind ourselves that the city of Anoka suffered a very devastating tornado with a terrific amount of damage some years back, and it certainly can happen anytime here. The thing that I think I would like to bring out is the fact that the shelter that we are recommending as a home shelter, the civil defense people, when I say we, is a shelter. The best type of shelter recommended is an outdoor shelter, a backyard shelter, dug underground and made of cast concrete. There are variations of less capability than that shelter, all of which will help an awful lot in either a tornado or an A-bomb blast to save people's lives. In fact, I'm sure that some of these houses that I've seen in the pictures here, if the people had had even a simple lean-to shelter built in the basement, the type of thing that we recommend that any homeowner can build from plans that we will provide for somewhere in the neighborhood of $40 top figure with new lumber, that people could have survived and probably would have in a lot of these houses where people were killed. And we feel from that standpoint that this is just good preparation for a natural disaster as well as a man-made war-borne disaster.
Could we go into just a little bit more detail? For instance, how deep should the outdoor backyard shelter be placed?
Well, a shelter that is significantly lower than ground level is really all that's required as far as the tornado is concerned. You like to be probably 3 feet below ground with a shelter built for atomic attack, but that's merely a detail. After you've dug a certain distance, 3 feet more doesn't make much difference one way or the other. And actually, it's the principle of getting below the level of the ground, and you don't have to dig way down to give yourself a very large measure of protection. These outside shelters cost quite a bit of money in some cases. I think they run, depending on what you want to spend, they can run as high as $2,000 or $3,000. You can build a shelter for somewhere around $1,000 out of concrete, a very simple shelter. But actually, we're suggesting that any kind of shelter is better than none. And we still feel that for the mass of people, this lean-to basement shelter will offer an awful lot of protection.
And you have actual detailed plans there?
Absolutely, yes. They're available to anyone.
Is there a charge for those, Bob?
There's a nominal charge. I think we have to get them from the government printing office, and it's about 15 cents or something of the sort.
That's a pretty worthy investment.
It certainly is.
Well, tornadoes. I used to live in Kansas. I used to visit my grandparents down there, and I've seen 3 tornadoes form.
Oh,
and They're so scary. We were lucky one time. A tornado came into Lebanon, Kansas, town of about 500 people, went roaring up the main street, turned the corner and went out of town, didn't hurt a thing. But such fortunate incidents are few and far between. And now, let's get into this second subject of ours tonight, what might cause weather phenomena. Remember the other day we were telling you that some experts, weather scientists, have been suggesting that the A-bomb experiments have had nothing to do with the various isolated weather extremities that we've noticed lately, especially in the southwest and along the eastern part of the nation. In fact, they say that the seeding of rain clouds for rain in drought areas could have a tremendous effect on that. There was one man who said that he traced the pattern of a tornado, or rather a hurricane, off the coast of Georgia in 1947, and it was heading out to sea, and then the United States Air Force seeded the clouds and tried to affect it somehow, and they certainly did affect it. It swung inland and did a devastating job in Georgia. Well, Bob, you've been studying this, I know.
Bill, I'm very much interested in this thing because accusations have been made at the atomic bomb testing program to the effect that a lot of our very unpleasant weather and very devastating weather has been caused by these atomic explosions. I don't think I'm prepared to tell you from the literature today and from the talks I've heard given by various authorities that the atomic explosions don't have some effect on the weather, but on the other hand, all the data at present time points to the fact that there is no proof that atomic explosions do have an effect. That is, I think we can sum it up by saying it's largely in the realm of the unknown at the moment. However, and incidentally on that subject, there is a very good article that, for anybody who wants to read it, by Mr. Marchant and Mr. Harris of the U.S. Weather Bureau, and this is printed in the magazine Science for January 21st, 1955. It examines the possible effects of atomic explosions from probably more significant than anything else in affecting the weather. And just to tell you in a quick history of what has happened, this group in New York, originating in New York with General Electric, known as Project Cirrus, set up to study the effects of cloud seeding, has studied the present techniques of cloud seeding by the silver iodide method, which is a technique of heating silver iodide and making a fine smoke out of the particles and dissipating them into the air. The significant thing is that in the early studies that were made of this procedure, Dr. Irving Langmuir of General Electric Company ran one of these generators on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday of each week for a number of weeks. He checked on the data of the precipitation from the U.S. Weather Bureau, and he found that there was a weekly rhythm indicating an effect of this seeding not only on the region near the seeding, which was out in New Mexico, but on an area as large as 1/3 of the United States.
Holy smokes.
At the time one of the articles on the subject was written in 1952, there were over 80 of these generators being operated, and the effect was so great that Langmuir could no longer discover his own tests. They were completely masked by the other effects, and the bad thing about it is that this silver iodide can float around and go halfway around the world until it finds the right conditions, and then it will cause precipitation at that point. I can't say that this causes tornadoes. I don't know whether anybody can say it, and I'm certainly not a weatherman. But all I can say is that it has been determined that the cloud seeding has more effect than anything else, and I personally think that the U.S. government's going to have to step in one of these days and regulate that procedure.
Well, thanks, Bob. You're always so doggone interesting when you come, and I can prove it, too, because here our time is already gone. Will you come again and tell us more?
I'd be most happy to.
Well, thank you, Bob Marchant. Thanks much. Well, again, we've learned much from our friend Bob Marchant, co-director of Civil Defense for St. Paul. Remember what he said now about those bomb shelters for your home? Why don't you invest 15 cents and get the plans? Believe me, I'm gonna. This is Bill Ingram. Good night.